Good afternoon, labdien visiem. Pirmkārt, tiem, kuriem ir nepieciešams tulkojums latviski no angļu valodas, jo visa diskusija nodaritēs angliski, droši paceļat rokas un jums atnesīs austiņas. So, I'm now moving to English. Good afternoon once more. My name is Gunta Sloga. I'm head of Baltic Center for Media Excellence, and welcome to our discussion Troļļo un valdi, viedokļu polarizācija tiešsaistē, or in English, troll and rule, polarization on social media. I'm very happy that the Nordic Council of Ministers, in coordination with other Nordic embassies located in Riga, have supported this issue. Because for me, as a journalist and somebody who currently works with media and disinformation, this has been an issue I'm dealing almost on an everyday basis, both myself being trolled and also seeing what's happening with media and wider society as a whole. And that is why I'm very happy that we have a very diverse panel today with us. Solvita Denisa, lecturer at Vidzeme University, but also very experienced disinformation resilience expert. Per Enerud from Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, but also long-term journalist. Kai Alanen from Dialogu Akadēmijas, philosopher, and also looking at this from philosophical view. And Signe Viška, who is translator, works with kids and youngsters, books, specifically also translating German books, and there we see this global issue of polarization, which is some kind of illness which affects everybody, because Signe sounds innocent translating kids' books, but also sometimes being in the very middle. And maybe we could start with Signe, because there are more like those experts, but yes, but start with you, just telling a bit more how you have faced it and what is your relation to polarization.
Well, I'm glad that we are starting with me because, I wanted to, just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert, so I don't have an education to discuss about social media issues and so on and so on. I can only speak from my experience. And as you mentioned, I'm an author and also a translator. I mostly translate children's and youth literature from German. And this is the book that got me a lot of trouble. Yes, exactly. Some know what I'm talking about. So this book was published last fall by the publishing house Pētergailis. And then everything started on Twitter with one tweet that, I went to the library and look at this. This is a new sex education book for young children. So pretty neutral at first. Then there were people who put just photos from some pages taken out of context, and then other people took other things out of context, and then it just was like a snowball effect. It went to Facebook, then it went to radio and TV and to the Latvian parliament even, because one of the Latvian politicians, Ainārs Šlesers, from the party Latvia First. He even took this book to the parliament, to the debates, and he took this book also to the debates on TV, where they were debating about the introduction of legal partnership, and he even quoted the book, and it was just crazy what happened. But not only... The thing is, it was not even a discussion. People were really aggressive, and there was a lot of hate. And, if you are a translator, not a lot of people recognize you. Because, mostly it's really nice if the publishing house puts your name on the cover, but not everyone does that. So if you're not in the literature business, you probably don't think a lot about the translator, but this was the case when everyone looked, there's the translator, she is the evil, she really is bad for our children, for our society, and so on. Also, the director of the publishing house was the evil, and so on. But the thing is, this book is about the human body, genitals, and so on. So it shows how genitals look like, what do you call them, and so on, so on. And the most important thing about this book is that it tells that it shows that children can set boundaries, and they can say to adults that you can't touch me and you can ask for help and so on. So this is a very important book, and it was just crazy what happened. And I got also hate comments on my personal photos on Facebook, and then I also got direct messages on Facebook and Instagram, and not from anonymous people actually, but from people with family pictures on their Facebook pages. And I can read you some of the messages I got. So the first one was, "I'll find you and kill you. I wish you will get raped by some hobos. I would pay them so they do that all night long. Do not come back to Latvia." I was at the Frankfurt Book Fair when it all happened. "Do not come back to Latvia. You will get stabbed on the streets. You are betraying Latvian values." And so on and so on and so on. And people even burned the books. They bought the book in the store. Some destroyed the books already in the shop. And then there were cases when some people burned the book right outside the store. Then they put also TikTok videos where they were burning this book and some other of my translations. And yeah, that was pretty crazy. And this book even landed in the police department for serious and serial crimes. because some organizations, they went to the police and said, "This book is pornography. You have to stop the distribution of this book." So yeah, it was completely crazy what happened.
Yes, and at the same time, it's sold out.
Yeah, it's sold out.
Let's move to Kai. When I heard about you from Stefan, I thought, we are like just looking for those solutions, and there is somebody who is head of Dialogu Akadēmijas. So what exactly do you do?
Yes, well, I mean, it's great to be here again, and I also, if I'm trying to relate to all those things, I need to start like a little bit broader perspective. So I work as a leader of Dialogu Academy. We're a small company in Finland. We train and people in dialogue skills, and we also arrange different processes with different organizations, also here in Latvia, how to increase dialogue in society. But my more general background is that I'm a researcher in political philosophy. And my main topic as a researcher is democracy, but democracy not so much as a system of government, but more as a way of life. And the basic idea in my research and the questions that I'm interested in is that if we want to have a well-functioning democratic society, we also need to have a society functioning in a democratic way and promoting democratic values in all parts of life. And of course, one of the most crucial things in democracies is that we can have discussions, conversations on difficult topics, and deal with our disagreements, also disagreements about values, in a constructive way. And of course, listening to what you faced in that moment when this book was published and all this attention was drawn to it, I think that's such a kind of a crucial example of how, like, what are the events at the moment that keep happening all the time, which is actually corroding our democratic way of life. Because one could imagine that just following that kind of hate happening to somebody, this encourages so many people to participate in any kind of conversations. And I have a very special relationship to this question of social media, because I'm not in social media, so I think I can be. I don't know about you. How are you? Are you all others here? But I always like I'm the official digital dinosaur here. But I think one of the reasons. So I look at it kind of as an outsider, but I think at the moment nobody can be really an outsider in social media. Even though you wouldn't have any accounts there, you are still, like, your life is so much structured by it. And I think what really interests me as an expert in dialogue, but also as a researcher in political philosophy, is that in social media at the moment, the influence to our society is so big, and there's so many different layers that we should actually try to think about. And I just say something of those just to kind of bring my perspective to this discussion. Because I think we have this question of that we know that these social media companies are making profit with these algorithms that actually boost this kind of behavior online. So we have a kind of a problem with the way that these tools function and how they are eroding our democracy. And then we have this very particular question that we have agents and actors like foreign powers who are using deliberately these tools to corrode our democracies and creating these kind of situations. I don't know, like, where there's some other, like, foreign powers involved, for example, in this case. You never know, usually. And then I think there's the very big question that is that what is creating these, in general, these emotions in our society at the moment? Like how come we live in a world where we are so constantly agitated, and agitated in such a kind of a quick, because it sounded that it happened during one day almost, in a couple of days. Lots of people got agitated by this book. Most of them probably have never even seen anything about it, but some really strong emotions took over. So my interest as a philosopher is also like, what are these emotions? Where do they come from? What is here in our society at the moment that gives gives fuel to these emotions, and how is this connected in a more deeper way to this change that has happened to all of us, that we are spending more and more time online, and it's changing our emotional dynamics. We are constantly exposed to so many stimuluses of the outside world and so many concerns. So these kind of three questions, like the algorithms, then these powers that are using these mechanisms, and then this broader question of what is happening to our everyday experiences that makes us so vulnerable for this kind of emotional agitation. These are the ones that interest me and how they're related.
I hope we will be able to talk more detailed on all those three issues, because I think they are extremely important. But maybe building a bridge to what Per does, the psychological defense, it's something new, and we see it's not only Sweden, some other Nordic countries, and of course Solvita will tell, she is also talking about this. So are governments or at least some other institutions recognizing that this is becoming more and more important? It's not only about some kind of, I don't know, military interventions, but really that there is somebody who is trying just grab or kidnap our minds?
Maybe there is, but I think that the key issue in our agency's work, I am working for a government agency with a scary name, Psychological Defense Agency. That sounds very much like the Ministry of Truth. But in reality, the point is that the perception of the agency is that democracy belongs to the citizens, not to the state. Democracy is, as we all know, it's a state structure, but primarily it's a relationship between people. And in this case, the job of the agency is to make sure that the citizens have the ability to exploit their rights to use democracy, to use the democracy as an instrument to scrutinize the authorities. So we are basically handing out the guns to the citizens to point at the government. This is the job I'm doing. Making sure that the citizens are not afraid of criticizing the government or political parties, and at the same time stopping every attempt from certain parties, foreign powers, to interfere, to poison the democratic dialogue in the society. This is the general idea of our agency. My personal connection to this field of interest is basically, I'm a journalist. Ethnically, I'm a journalist, actually. This is the training I have. I don't know any kind of other trade than journalism. I just happen to work in a state agency. And as a journalist, the first week, you try to learn how to shape a message that is appetizing for a reader, for the audience, and how to check facts. So fact-checking and creating this kind of rapport with the readers, this is the first week of training as a journalist. And this is actually also the first rule of any kind of any form of communication, to be able to reach the audience. If I suddenly switch to a foreign language, I will lose most of you. So I must use certain codes, values, expressions. If I use a certain kind of slang only used by journalists, I wouldn't be understood even by Swedish speakers. If I would speak, like say, Riga kids slang, I would probably make a fool out of myself and I will lose my audience anyway. So I need to build this bridge. This is called rapport. And in disinformation, we tend to look at the wrong stuff. We tend to look at the information as being bearer of truth or false statements. But in disinformation, information manipulation, troll factories, they don't care about facts or lies. They care about relations. And this is the essence of the troll industry, to allow a certain part of the audience to feel, yes, I'm part of this. Yes, they're not. She's not a part of what I believe in. And you aggregate this kind of feeling and you create a togetherness. And this is true almost for every kind of communication you hear. You want to capture a certain part of the audience and you want to scare away other parts of the audience to create a certain us. Yes.
Thank you. Solvita, I have to admit that Solvita was disinformation resilience expert at the center for many years, but then she had, we are still friends, I have to say, but why I'm telling this, I think you were the first person many years ago who started talking about those issues, at least at our center, about resilience, about this psychological defense, cognitive issues of disinformation. So sometimes I thought, oh, you are painting the picture very bleak, but actually some time passes and yes, Solvita was true again. So
it's good to hear. Thank you so much, Gunta. It's a great introduction, but let me start with Signe's presentation. So when Signe shared her experience, I'm not going to name it the victim of disinformation, but a survivor of disinformation. I remembered my own experience. One day I found myself in the epicenter of Kremlin's information activity or information operation. It was not dedicated to me, it was dedicated to a research I did together with one quite significant organization as a consultant. And I figure out that as a person, as an individual, I'm going through very difficult times because this research was addressed in videos also made by Ramzan Kadyrov, and I was some kind of, a target of these videos. But on the second hand, or on the other hand, it was a great opportunity for me, as for a researcher, to get deeper into this activity. And as a researcher, I find out that I can gather unique experience. And based on this unique experience, when you can connect dots, when you can identify these dots, I managed to produce thousands of pages information, and I trained military person, I trained teachers, I trained pupils, and why I did so? So I did it to become resilient myself. And this is what is the core of my activities. So I tried to figure out a proper way how to increase resilience. And when I started with the media literacy, later on I moved to cognitive resilience, because we need to find out what the problem is. And in my opinion, the problem is larger, and the problem is that trolls, in many cases, this is a part of ongoing cognitive warfare. And if we are talking about cognitive warfare, we are having absolutely different framework and different solutions.
Per Aki, could you maybe elaborate a bit more about this cognitive warfare? Because, of course, when we talk about cognitive warfare, it's very easy to say, at least in this region, it's Russia, or now we see China is also becoming global player, but can we always blame only them on being masterminds of this cognitive warfare?
Well, we could probably, but then we would be ourselves aggressors, so to say. I mean, the point here is not the... in general, in any situation, in any kind of discussion, we are trying to convince people on a cognitive level. If we are aware of this or not, but basically this is our responsibilities as repliers, so to say. Any kind of political party is trying to issue some kind of cognitive pressure upon us. So I don't think that is the actually... We shouldn't start looking for who's to blame and try to shut them up. We should try to embrace our own ability to withstand that kind of stuff, to understand that they are trying to play with me, they're trying to manipulate me, and this is the responsibility of the citizen, not the state. And this is the important element, I think, in our job, in my agency, is to make people believe, no, the state is not going to shut down unpleasant disinformation channels. You are allowed, we are in a democracy, you're allowed to lie. This is basically storytelling 101. The Little Red Riding Hood is a lying story. There's no truth in any fairy tale. We are allowed to lie, but we're not understanding Little Red Riding Hood as an example of situation in the forest. We understand that it's a lie, and this is the point here. We must understand our ability to defend ourselves rather than trying to point on who's trying to attack us. On the other hand, I would say that all warfare is cognitive. There is no other point in any kind of war than to convince us to do something that we don't want to. If I can do this without like firing a lot of expensive bombs and fighter jets, well, it's easier, cheaper to lie to. For instance, Czechoslovakia in 1948 was conquered by Russia without one single shot being shot, or the Baltic states in 1939. Warfare is always cognitive, but to defend ourselves against the cognitive warfare is the important part, and this is the job of the individual and not pointing at enemies. Everyone is doing it.
No, I would like to continue because I think this is absolutely necessary, that we somehow need to create and promote new skills for citizens. But this is also quite a lot to ask at the moment, I think, that because it feels that we are like bombarded every day with this kind of information that gets us agitated and makes us quite vulnerable to these kind of strategies that are used. And it's not just like some foreign powers. So many actors in our society are trying to agitate each other all the time. So I'm also thinking that and I hope that we could have more discussion on the systemic and structural changes that we need to do, or try to promote that how we could lessen this load or this constant bombardment that each of us have in our life. Because at the moment, and I think like one of the very concrete discussions in Finland at the moment is, for example, that how much time do children spend with their phones and online? Like should we try to limit the use of smartphones in schools? And I think that's like one way of looking at the thing, that what are the things that actually expose us on a daily basis to these kind of informational kind of attacks. And I'm not saying that would solve everything, but I think we, in addition to these kind of cognitive skills that the citizens have, I think our societies also need to do structural and systemic changes that would protect us somehow more. And of course, in democracies, it's very difficult to do because I don't suppose we want laws that forbid people to go online and be exposed, for example. But I think there is also things that we need to do on that level, because I think it's quite a lot demanded from the citizens at the moment that, okay, be bombarded 24/7 with all this kind of stuff, but be very cognitively aware all the time and have all the good strategies to do that. So I think we kind of need both. And I think we are so late in this discussion that what are the systemic structural changes. And I'm completely baffled what's happening with AI, for example, because it seems to be increasing this informational bombardment and these emotional manipulations that we are constantly exposed. So I would add this layer also to the discussion.
But isn't it because all those technological changes have been so rapid, you know, we just cannot follow up, because of course when it comes to big tech, we see EU now, also US government is recognizing it and trying to do something, but they are those giants who are living somewhere outside all the other systems and regulations. That's very hard to force them. So could it be that we are just not able to somehow to slow them down?
Well, I think that is the obviously probably the biggest problem at the moment, that these companies that are profiting so much from this technology, they don't obviously want to change their ways that these algorithms function, because that's their way of making money. And they have become so quickly so powerful. And I don't think it's just about the power of money, it's the power of their way of forming our everyday life. Like, we are all somehow connected to these big tech companies and their way of forming our daily experiences. So I think it is a very complicated question, but I still think that democratic societies have responsibilities of protecting their citizens also. And I think, and we are now even just very slowly starting to understand like what is actually happening with like what is the data that is gathered from us, how it's used to manipulate us. And we are even in situations that if I would be completely offline and wouldn't be participating in any of those things, still there would be lots of data available about me because it's everywhere in our society. So I think this broader question also of what are the structures that are supporting this kind of warfare inside our democracies, which we should discuss. And I think I'm a bit hopeful that we are in the European Union, because European Union seems to be more eager to try to do something on the structural level also. And of course, EU is quite powerful as an actor, even though those companies are in the United States, but most of them, TikTok is in China, owned by Chinese companies. So, but again, it's I think we have to tackle all those different levels at the same time. So, and it makes it a big challenge. But I think we just need to keep on talking and discussing what can we actually do on different levels.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to Solvita. You mentioned that you've been training different kinds of groups of people. What is your takeaway? What are the ways, the methods which work best to I wouldn't say convince, we don't need to convince anybody, just making aware of all those threats or challenges we face every day in this internet and digital world?
Wow, it's a tricky question, but I think that the core of the solution is in what Per mentioned. It's a community and identity. It should be identity and community based. I don't see any problems in the phone as a gadget itself. So it's like a stick, you know, you can do different types with a stick. You can use it as a tool in agriculture, and you can use it as a kind of weapon. So there is not, the problem itself is in our identity and identities, and I do not see a problem in Russia or China when we are talking about those who are implementing potential threat. But what is the need for all of us is a future-oriented approach. You mentioned data and what it is possible to do with the data. My question is, so by gathering data today, what kind of possibilities, new possibilities for those who are gathering this data or for those who will be able to use this data will be able or available tomorrow? And to have this future-oriented approach is super important to figure out how to speak with the audiences. And for me, the most actually problematic audience is children. Because when you speak about or with children, you have to understand that they will be the users of the new gadget, the users of producers of new type of data. And we need now, when we have them all in their school or in the kindergarten, we have to figure out a proper way how to equip them for this very rapidly changing world. And I think the core, so maybe in 5 years I'll be using other words, but I think that the only solution is to stick to identity, to group, to community, because this will stay with us. Maybe we will not have phones tomorrow, we will have a chip somewhere in our brain. Maybe we will have some other types of communication, knowledge exchange, knowledge production. But anyhow, we will communicate with those who are with us, with our kids, with our families, with our friends. Maybe it will not be the state tomorrow, let's be honest. Maybe we'll have some other types of unities. But the identity will stay. And the future-oriented approach, I think, will lay in this paradigm. Maybe, Per, you can continue with.
Unless you have other applause. Well, I think you're right, and I think we must watch it from a community perspective, but also from the individual perspective. The Russian Nobel Prize winner Solzhenitsyn mentioned in a very famous essay that the only way of combating the dictatorship is to refuse personally taking part in the lying. And this is a very, very tough challenge, but it's also the only way of coming out from the disinformation era, that we realize, okay, if I'm spreading a lie, if I'm sharing a false statement on the internet, I'm the liar. I'm the attacker. I can't blame Russia if I'm sharing a stupid video blaming Signe for poisoning Latvia. That's me. I'm Russia then. And this is what we need to tell. Our agency have a very, very strong cooperation with the civil society and the media in a media training campaign in the schools. And this is also for making kids understanding that they have to ask, is this really happening? Is this really true? And obviously this is a very, very tough challenge, but kids aren't stupid. And if we sit here on this podium and decide, okay, we understand, they don't, they're stupid, we must learn them, we must teach them, then we are the proletariat, the avant-garde of the proletariat or whatever. I mean, we try to educate the people because we're smarter than them, when we're not. Probably more stupid, and little children in schools, they're probably more smart than I am, at least, with social media, etc., etc. So having a community approach and understand the responsibility of the individual, this is the two elements of the battle against poisoning the democratic society.
Yes, I think it's very important. You both are mentioning community and talking. I think Lampa is all about it. Really, people just coming and talking in sensible way. But I would like to ask Signe, both Solvita and Per were talking about kids and how important is talking to children, and you working with kids literature and of course also being in touch with writers and the people who are working with children. So what is your view, how and in what way still we have to talk to kids about the world we live in? And also this stereotype, do they actually read books you translate?
Well, actually, this is a great question because I moderated a discussion yesterday about difficult topics in children's literature. And what are those difficult topics? Of course, not only sex education and so on, it's also death, war, illness, and so on. And a lot of adults want to protect their children. But what they don't realize is it's not the books, it's not the movies and so on that endanger the children, that's the world itself. So, okay, if you don't give the picture book about the war and the Ukraine to the child will still see the news and so on. So you can't isolate the child from what's happening. And the parent, I think, has to talk to the child. Of course, you don't have to go... Okay, I'm translating a lot of books from German, and in German children's literature, there's, I don't want to call it a trend, but there's a lot of books on death, on grandparents' death, on dementia, and so on and so on. And it really helps if there's a case in family where really there's a grandfather or a grandmother with illness and so on, and if you don't have the words to talk about, you have the book that you can read together, and maybe it can help to not to get over the situation, but to live with it. And I think a lot of problems start also with the parents. If the parents don't read the book and take things out of context, then it goes also to the children, and it has consequences. If you don't learn how to think between black and white, then it's really hard to live actually in a democracy. And also in a discussion today, someone said, yeah, it's easier for the brain to think in black and white categories. It's a lot more of work to analyze, to take things in context, and so on. But that's really the job of the parents to think that way and then to show the children the example. And talking about difficult topics is maybe not difficult at all if you look at it in a different angle.
Thank you. I think now it's time to involve our audience. If you have any questions or comments at this stage, we would. There is a hand.
Hi there, thank you for the interesting discussion. Honestly, I had a question. I think it more so relates to Per, Solvita and Kai, because you mentioned that the issue nowadays is relatively a lack of education, or rather a lack of tools that people can use to analyze what's true and what is not true. However, I would like to sort of give a little bit of pushback against that, because there are things, if we look at, for example, the Einar Schlesser's case, I am 99% sure that he in his heart completely believes that such a book is a danger to his children, not for any logical reasons, but just because he believes that. So in a very postmodern perspective, we can't really give people the tools to educate themselves, because they will educate themselves anyways in a completely different way than we expect them to do. So rather, my bigger question is, if we understand that we live in this postmodern world where every single person has their own perspective on what the truth is, how can we put either education or this community or ideology or whatever, how can we even solve these issues then?
Well, I could comment, because my point that I'm trying to make in many cases is that I think we need the education, but we also, I come back to these structural questions again, that we also need to do something in our society that takes away this constant emotional pressure. Because, so I think this also, it's cognitive warfare, but it's very much an emotional warfare. And I would disagree with the idea that the phone is just a tool, because I think that's one of the structural questions at the moment. It's not a stick in that sort of sense, because the stick is not programmed and designed to make you addictive. But these phones that we have at the moment are designed deliberately to make us addictive to all the different apps and functions there. And this is one of the problems at the moment. And children are super vulnerable to this, for example. So we are raising, and all of us are involved, but we are in a situation where very big part of us, including myself, I think, I'm addicted to these machines that actually create this constant emotional pressure on me. And it's, so it's not just that we have tools that are somehow neutral. At least at the moment, the tools that we have are not neutral. They are designed to make us addicted, and this sort of addiction is very emotional. So it raises this emotional pressure in our society. So in addition, again, I'm probably repeating myself, in addition to the training that we need for people, we need ways to somehow lower the emotional temperature in our society, which part of it is created deliberately by this technology.
But how and who should do
Well,
this?
I think it has to be also a legal question, in that sort of sense, that we can't allow these people that are using this, designing these devices, to use them in this way. I mean, it shouldn't be allowed. Like we are preventing like poisonous foods, poisonous materials in our clothes and those sort of things. In the same way, we should be able to deal with companies and actors who are trying to use technology in order to kind of poison our mind. Of course, it's much more difficult to kind of acknowledge, because we are just still gathering the scientific evidence on that, but I think we are having more and more of evidence how it's influencing especially our children. So at least we should first try to protect our children from this kind of a constant emotional pressure that comes from being addicted to these new technologies.
If you haven't yet, please read a book written by Pascal Boyer, Mind Makes Societies. And he is cognitive evolutionist. What he's written about is centuries of human history. Prior we moved to phones, and the core idea is that our brain are made, so we have our brain are kind of tools, and our brain are made to live in society, to share information, to steal information, to protect some specific groups, and I think this is still with us. So why we are sitting here and talking about these important topics, because our mind made this society for us to speak about. So if I can make one recommendation, one book, please try to find Pascal Boyer.
Okay, very specific advice. Question there and then there.
Thank you for a very interesting conversation. I wanted to kind of connect up with one of the comments that came earlier here, and also highlight that you have a reference here in your sort of little intro page to John Haidt's book, or actually I will refer to his earlier book, The Righteous Mind. And I'm a little curious about sort of, you haven't really talked too much about polarization, which assumes actually there are forces from two directions, right? And I think that the thing that I think needs to be asked is what drives the polarization, right? There's been studies done on this in the US showing that what in fact has been occurring is that the left has moved far more than the right in the political world, right? And there is a tendency also from the left to moralize in this very emotional way, right? And that, you know, includes areas that, for example, that your book has deals with. There's a lot of people around, you know, still think that the nation state exists and it's a good thing, that, you know, mostly we have men and women, you know, we have a fairly traditional view of things, right? And many of them feel also very demonized, right, with the critique that's coming from the other side, which then in turn seems to be shocked that there is a response, you know, to their positions. So my question for you guys is really, you know, how do you view this polarization process? Is it just driven from trolls from the right? Or is it that you see also a responsibility coming from a very emotionally invested movement from the left around a lot of the issues of the day? And I was just wondering how you see that a little bit. Thanks.
Who would like to follow up? Kai?
Well, it's good that you brought up Jonathan Haidt and his researches. I mean, his latest book is The Anxious Generation, about the smartphones, and he sees these connections between this technology and these developments that you have just mentioned. But I think it's very crucial to understand that it's coming from both sides. And somehow it seems that with many questions we are, like, in polarization, it seems to happen that we think that if somebody's disagreeing with us, we became so emotional, we think that it's kind of an existential threat. Your book was kind of a matter of life. It sounded it's a matter of life and death to those people. And I think this is something, I probably think it comes back to these cognitive skills and strategies. How do we respond to things that we disagree without thinking that it's an existential threat to us? Because there are real existential threats, we know it. But this book is not one of them. And I mean, it's in democracy, everybody should be free to disagree with the content and criticize people who publish it, but it's not a matter of life and death. And this rhetoric is on both, like on the very progressive left also at the moment, and of course with the far right. And again, how do we bring the emotional temperature down a little bit in order not to see existential threats in issues that actually don't have it? And I think, it's good for these foreign powers who are trying to take advantage of this, because it takes away our attention away from the real threats that we have for our democracies, coming from them, for example.
Yeah, I can just add that in my previous position, I was working in Brussels in a group that was documenting and debunking disinformation from Russia, and we identified the disaster narrative as a key element. I mean, you can narrate almost any kind of happening in a disaster way, and you can create a existential threat to Finland in basically any question if you want to shape it like that. So this is a conscious choice from aggressors, so to say. But eventually we end up in the situation that, okay, polarization, well, it's not a problem outside me. It's me who must be, I must understand that I have to not choose side. And we don't see it only in politics. I would say that if you compare football fanatics 70 years ago, you wouldn't probably have that kind of emotional aggression around a certain football team as you have today, where you can't go into a pub if you're wearing the wrong colors, even as a foreigner. So this is obviously a global process outside the democratic society. It's a human nature. We want to belong, and we want to identify. We want to identify us, and we want to identify them. And in a global society where we travel everywhere, we move everywhere, there is no real borders, okay, we need to draw borders around in different kind of shapes than the state borders we used to. So I can't say there is no silver bullet here, but we have our own responsibility. Just as not taking part in the lying, we need to not take part in the polarization process, personally.
Can I just quickly comment, because we have, like, you who are journalists, I think mainstream media has a big responsibility here also, not to amplifying this existential threat narrative in the mainstream media also. And at least in Finland at the moment, I'm concerned that our mainstream media is not, they don't have, mostly I think they're lacking these strategies, how to, if some politician is kind of boosting this existential threat on some question, I think journalists would need more skills how to frame it a bit differently, still reporting it, but kind of playing down the emotional tone there. And I think that's also quite crucial element here. And I think, again, this is a relatively new phenomenon. It's been going on for like a decade now, but we should learn quite quickly how to tackle this.
I think we need to be ready for changes, and media will change. And we already, when we are pronouncing media, we have different type of media, different, even ideas of media. When you are mentioning countries, you mentioned the US. So in the US, we see media for those who belong. So media already is a continuation of your identity and sense of belonging. So let's wait for new types of media and new types of journalism, because we are definitely moving into this next phase of transformation.
Hello. Thanks very much for the discussion. My question kind of follows on from what you were just saying. It's a question about fact and fiction. I was very struck by what Per said earlier on about, in a society you are allowed to lie, and then using the example of the story of Little Red Riding Hood. But surely it's the case that when you're telling the story of Little Red Riding Hood, or you're hearing the story of Little Red Riding Hood, you're fully invested and you really believe in it, and you get, become frightened and experience emotion. But ultimately, you know that it has the status of fiction, and the hearers and the tellers, they all agree that it has this status of fiction. Whereas in the online social media world, it seems to me that fact and fiction both claim the same privileges. You have fact posing as fiction, fiction posing as fact. So are we not moving towards a different definition of fact and fiction? And in these attempts to address this issue, is it a case of like stepping back and trying to reimpose the classical difference between fact and fiction? Because if we get to a stage where people don't really care about the difference between fact and fiction online, then we have something else which requires a new word, a new definition, don't we? So how do we address this or reinforce that this is an important differentiation to make?
I love questions about facts and false and fiction, etc. But generally, this is also emotionally loaded. If you say that Arsenal is the best football team, for an Arsenal fan, it will be the best football team, no matter where in the table you are. And for an enemy of the Arsenal football team, no matter if they're leading the league, it will be not true. So facts and fiction is generally a question about hierarchy. If you like the guy who is telling it, then it's a fact, even if the factual base is wrong. So when we see certain presidential candidates in the United States claim something apparently wrong, it will be true for his followers, because we organize against an identity. Fact, if a thing is a fact, it's a question of identity, not about what actually is true or not. It's weird, isn't it? But if you say that, all facts are emotionally loaded, that is the question. And we, as you say, we need to unload this emotional element. And in a democracy, you can say that this is a very bad book. And then others say, no, this book is great. and you can discuss, and you can agree eventually that, okay, this book has qualities, or this book has issues, but you don't have to kill the writer or the translator. This is basically how the democracy works. You are, even in a democracy, allowed to be wrong. This is the beauty of democracy. So facts or fiction is not relevant in the information era. It's how we respect each other and are able. You know, the German philosopher Martin Buber, he has a book called Me and You, and he basics a ethics where we relate to each other as me and you, instead of relating our society against us and them. If we look at each other as me and you, there will be no polarization. There will be issues and discussion and disagreement, but no polarization. So.
And when it comes to norms, to attitudes, they are not formed only from facts. They are also made from fairy tales, they are made from movies, season 1, season 2. This is what made these mindsets and shortcuts. And later on these shortcuts also grounded into science fiction, you are dealing, or you are trying to work with the fact itself. And also, fact is how you can move yourself in the group. So to take one identity or another identity, because we have multiple identities. And I think the role of of fiction information, of non-fact-based information, is crucial. And we can see a lot of information operation in cognitive domain based mainly on non-fact-based activities.
I have a question. What do you think about this massive double standard between how regulators in public treat social media and how they treat media outlets? Like, we have public broadcaster, which essentially is government-owned, heavily subsidized media outlets, but we don't have anything like that for social media. Or we really care about the ownership of media outlets, but for example, for most large social networks, for example, we have no idea who provided debt for buying Twitter and things like that. Where do you think this difference comes from in the willingness to criticize and regulate media outlets on one hand and social media networks on the other hand?
Well, very quickly, I think one difference is somehow I think we feel more that we are somehow also the owners of social media because we are actors there. So it's also one part of the problem, I think, that we are like also ourselves, we are emotionally invested in the dynamics of social media, but the media, like the old-fashioned media, is more like usually some journalists there sort of thing, which is easier to criticize then. And I think, again, this development has been so fast, and it's somehow completely new. What are these new structures and these companies and how it's influencing everything? So we are kind of running against the development, understanding like what are these actually. I mean, there's big questions obviously constantly. Is it the media? Like, is the media that should be regulated somehow? Do they have a responsibility of the contents? And those sort of things. So I think those two things, we are involved there, so it kind of makes it difficult to make the distance, and then it's new, and we don't really understand so well. I mean, probably now we do, but still the discussion is just beginning.
Thank you. I see some other hands raised, but unfortunately we are coming to the end of the time of this discussion, and that's why, like, there's clear message out from this that there will be different kinds of regulations and hope societal agreements that we should do something, but of course on everyday basis many of us are facing this, and that's why I would like to ask Signe to end this discussion, because you didn't talk so much maybe. What is your know-how now from coming out from this, sorry for my language, shitstorm? What is your short advice for anybody who is trolled today or is in this big emotional load?
Be brave, keep your head high, and be with people who support you, because even though the ones who threaten you and so on, they're really loud, but actually that's not the most part of the society. So concentrate on the people who support you and go to the police and report the hate comments and threats, I did that. And so just keep fighting, let's say that.
Thank you. I think it's a good way to end our discussion. Keep fighting on everyday basis, but also thinking about this systemical change. Thanks a lot for joining us.